Welcome to Podification, the show where three pastors sit around displaying their sharp wit and their occasionally sharp theology. We hope you enjoy. Now let's get on to the show.
And go.
All right. Well, welcome. We're back. We're back after a week-long break. Podification episode 11.
11.
Yep, we made it out of the single digits, and we're episode 11. Welcome back. We've missed you guys. Thank you for tuning in again. Excited to kind of be back here chatting with you, Brent. And this week we have a guest. Super excited about this conversation. This is Brian Murphy is here. Welcome.
Yeah.
Brian, thank you so much for joining us. Would you care to introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, I don't know who these people are on the podcast. I just met them this afternoon.
Me neither.
No, I'm Brian Murphy. I attend Daybreak Community Church. I haven't been attending in person recently. We've been doing it at home, given kind of health kind of concerns. But excited for this little venture into podcastification or whatever we're doing here. It should be interesting.
Close enough, yeah.
It's kind of scary being knowing the two of these. I've got to fend against both, Brent and Jesse at the same time.
That's right. I hope you're well prepared.
Yeah.
We'll find out.
Well, Brian, I know we've been excited to have you here to join us for a while.
Yeah.
Just to kind of bring you up to speed. I guess we should say typically, although it's been many weeks, we started this podcast and eventually we'll probably continue it with the other member of our pastoral staff at Daybreak Church, Sean. But he's been out for a little while. And so we've had a series of guests on the podcast, which has been great fun and probably more popular than our original crew. But Brian, you were actually somebody that we had talked kind of several weeks ago. It'd be like, man, it'd be great to get him on here, particularly because we have something to talk about that Brent and I are even more ignorant about than we are ignorant about most other things. So we're excited to have you and your wisdom and your insight here. As we
sounds like a setup.
Yeah. I'm just pitching a slow arc over the home plate, man. And you're just going to swing away at it.
Yeah.
Well, just if I could add to that, but the people that don't know, Brian is a lawyer. And so what that means is right now he's billing us. Exactly.
So this podcast will be 5 minutes long.
Send me your emails. You'll get an electronic invoice.
I wish we hadn't taken so long to set up now. I'm just
really.
Well, as is kind of our tradition, I like to start us off here with a chance to just kind of catching one another up, catching listeners up on what has been big in our lives over the last week. We could even say 2 weeks since we haven't been together for a couple weeks. Really, this is a segment in our conversation. Brent and I oftentimes, Brian, will get together and talk, I guess you could say talk shop. We talk theology, we talk church, we talk work together. And sometimes just kind of the daily check-in kind of conversations can get kind of sidelined and we forget to hear kind of what's going on in one another's lives, And so I want to really kind of be intentional about this, which I think is a good thing to do, and just say like, what's going on in your life this week? Something big or something, that was just big to you or whatever. And I'll go ahead and go first. I'll volunteer to go first this week because I don't know if I've done that before. This was an exciting thing for me. And if you're listening to the podcast instead of watching the video, I'll forgive you for not noticing. But I have discovered something different about the way that I look. And I think this is just new since I moved to Vermont, but I must be putting off an aura that is new to me. And I'm jazzed about it. And let me tell you what happened. I recently went to Panera Bread to do some writing. I haven't been there for, 4 months, right? But it's been so hot here. I finally heard that they're open. So I'm like, I'm going to go there and I'm going to sit down at a table and I'm going to do some writing, air conditioning. Nobody else is there. So I'm thinking this is going to be perfect. So I drive over there, park, walk in, wear a mask and everything. You walk in, you get your coffee, and you sit down. Once you sit down, you can take your mask off. I'm sitting there, the place is empty. I'm writing away, and it's great. And out of nowhere, this guy comes into the store and walks straight up to me, right? Like, doesn't hesitate at all. Walks straight up to me, looks me in the eyes, and stands like a respectful distance away. And he looks at me and he says, "Man, that's a really nice Mercedes you got out there." And I thought, why? what are you talking about? So I was like, "Excuse me?" And he said, "Well, you're the one who owns the Mercedes Benz out there, right? That's a really nice car. I just want to congratulate you on that." And I was like, man, I appreciate that I look like the kind of guy that would have a car like that. But honestly, it's not mine. I don't know what to tell you. And so he, apologized and walked away. But like, honestly, that kind of made my day. I don't have that car, but the fact that I look like maybe put together enough to be that guy, I feel pretty good about that. So right now what's big in my life is just that I look like I'm killing it. Like I look like I've got it all together.
That you got that much out of that one comment?
That's all. Yeah, that's all I got out of that. Yeah. I mean, he just walked in. He's like, "That's the guy. Like, that's the guy who has that car."
Hang on that.
Yeah,
Jesse.
yeah, right.
Yeah,
Take what you could get. It reminded me the church used to be the cleanup team for the Vermont City Marathon, and so we would go before and after and help with the volunteer at the marathon. And I was like going down one morning along with all the runners who were getting ready for it, and this guy, I was going to clean up trash, and the runner next to me looked at me and says, "Good luck today," and I didn't have the nerve to say. So I just said, "Yeah, you too."
You too. So, brilliant.
It makes you feel good. It's like, that guy thinks I could run 26 miles.
Totally. Yeah.
Or that person's insane.
Yeah, exactly.
What was he thinking?
Yeah. I was just really glad he didn't come and say like that's a nice car your dad drives or something, But like,
that's
yeah.
good.
So anyway, I moved on from being the guy who feels like he's stealing the white nondescript car out of the airport parking lot for Brent, because that was a couple weeks ago, to now the guy who's like just rolling in his convertible Mercedes apparently. So yeah, that's what's big in my life this week.
Yeah.
I'm
maybe Brent will loan you his car now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's more my speed.
The Versa.
So Brent, what's going on in your life?
So as I've mentioned, my mother-in-law is coming to live with us in a couple of weeks. And so we've got several projects going on to get the house ready. Took down a bunch of trees to get the new septic system put in. But we redid our kitchen upstairs. And I'm just not handy at all. But I put in the new sink.
Hey.
With the exception, wait. With the exception of I couldn't figure out how to do the PVC piping. So I have someone coming later to finish that for me. But I literally had to get, like a garden hose, because I couldn't figure out how to get the PVC pipe to connect together. So literally I got this big transparent hose and hooked it from one part of the sink to the other part of the sink. So Lori could at least use it until I get someone who knows how to do plumbing here. So that was a pretty big project this week.
Well, if I have plumbing needs, I won't call you, Brent.
Yeah,
No. I should have brought a picture. It's pretty...
I'm trying to picture this. But
so the sink, the PVC pipe that connects to the drain, you come down and then you have to connect to the rest of the PVC pipe. I couldn't get the angled parts all right to connect together. So I actually went to Lowe's and I found this transparent tube where I could hook to the drain and then shove it down into the pipe. And so it drains through that until I can get someone to get the right PVC connections.
So the only problem with that situation is if it backs up.
Correct.
Right. I understand.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
it's
Bob.
not like it's not
Yeah.
like you're gonna leave like for like it's good enough for the next year or whatever. You are gonna like get that done.
Well, Bob Perry is supposed to help me, and so he's like every other Vermonter who is skilled in the summertime. He has no time at the moment. So maybe part of whoever listens to this podcast could text Bob Perry and say, "Help Brent," and that would be fine.
Hey, good for you though, man. I mean, the necessity is the mother of invention, right? It sounds like you
right.
came up with a good creative solution, though.
I've been saying that slogan a lot in all seriousness because of the pandemic. It's like all the things that I never thought I would see. Like they, at the hospital, it's like, you can't work from home. Well, in a week, we all figured out pretty much how we work from home,
Yeah.
And so necessity is the mother of invention. That's right.
And you didn't use any white duct tape at all.
I can't say that. I did.
Oh.
I did use some. So to keep the bottom part from coming out, I had to duct tape it. So.
There are two signs that Brent has been present in a building.
Yeah.
And one of them is like a trail of empty Diet Coke bottles.
Yeah.
And the other is that white duct tape is holding various things together. And if either of one of those two things are present, Brent has been there.
It's really like, that's all you need in life is Diet Coke and duct tape.
And duct tape, yeah.
And Gorilla
That's
Glue,
good,
and you're good.
And some
That's
Gorilla,
right.
yeah, that's next
right.
level stuff, man.
Yeah.
So well done, Brent. I'm happy, looking forward to an update on that. Hopefully it won't be a $500 flooding bill update.
Yeah. Text Bob Perry. Help
Text
Brent.
Bob, please. Yeah. Hashtag help Brent. So Brian, what about you, man? Tell us something big going on in your life.
Well, what's going on big is I'm a grandfather now, and so that's huge.
Hey,
Congratulations.
the best for last. Yeah,
I
Chip.
know.
That's
I know.
amazing.
So we went down to see our grandson about a month ago, and we're gearing up to see him at the beach in New Jersey in about 3 weeks.
That's
and
awesome.
we've been not Zooming, but we have this other device. Again, I'm not a techno person where we can, it's kind of like an iPod or an iPad, but it's not. It's like a thing called I don't know, Pilot or something like that. Anyways, it's a screen like this where you can talk to basically your kid. So we've been talking to him on a regular basis, and it's amazing what happens in even a day or 2 days for a little kid. He just looks like, holy smokes, he's so much bigger and he's more active, and boy, his neck's getting stronger. So that's pretty big in our life. And wanted to share a story with you. When you were talking about home improvement, I just had a laugh. I was like, what home improvement can I basically, one up or compete with Brent? And I'm like, I don't have any of those stories. I'm not very talented. But the one thing that happens is when I'm on the phone and I'm talking to anybody, literally my house could burn down around me. I'm like in that call. So my kids will come up and say, hey, can I take the car, drive to Florida? If I'm on the phone, I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever, it doesn't matter. But our steps in the back needed to be resurfaced. So Laura sanded them. She's quite the do-it-yourselfer, and had shellacked them, I guess that's right, put lacquer over like that. And she put a giant stool in front of the door. So like, hey, don't walk out that door because there's lacquer on the other side. So she did it, and I knew that, and the day was done. But she went out 2 days later to do a second coat, and did the very same thing where put the stool, anything, almost she had a large sign like use the other door. But I was on the phone, and we have a cat that was pestering me. So while I'm talking to her, it's just like when I'm in the phone mode, I just move the stool out and let the cat, and the cat went out right through all the stuff. And I see Laura's like, where did that sound like a good idea? And I was like, I was on the phone. Sorry.
Different rules apply when you're on the phone.
So yeah, my kids know exactly. If they need anything, just when I'm on the phone, they'll ask me, and it's a thumbs up. So anyways, Laura had to do an extra coat. Laura had to do an extra coat on the steps because of my inadvertence. But all is well here.
Cat prints were not acceptable.
Well, congrats on the grandson. I think I've said this to you already, but I mean it. You and Laura do not look old enough to be grandparents. That's for sure.
Got that?
Yeah.
That is 100% true.
Not paid
I would
for.
agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Not paid for.
Yeah. So I was trying to get a discount on the billing, but yeah.
Oh, 100% with that comment.
All right. Hey. All right. So occasionally we get questions or goofy, or sometimes serious questions, sometimes goofy questions from people who listen to this. And by the way, we love that. We love
those. Yeah.
Guys. So if you do happen to listen and want to send in a question, it could be goofy, it could be serious. We'd love to talk about it or whatever. So just email info@daybreakvermont.org and we'll get them and we'll have a look and we'll look through comments and stuff like that. I have a question here, which I think was submitted kind of a while ago, and it was kind of just low down on the list, and I found it. And it is a random question. And I'm interested, I guess, in your guys' answers. I don't know if there's some kind of psychoanalytical kind of question, but here it is. If imagine your name is a verb. If your name was a verb, what action would it describe? So that's not clear about first or last name. But let's say last name. So.
Oh, last name. Okay.
Well, if you have an answer for Brian, you could do that. That's fine. But
okay.
but if your name was a verb, what would that verb? What would that action be? What do you got, Brent?
I would say scowl.
What?
Yeah, I just saw like my kids say, "Dad, you have a scowl on your face all the time," and that's whether I'm happy or sad or angry, or mostly if I'm just thinking about something, I scowl. You know.
Could you use that in a sentence?
Brent has a beautiful scowl on his face.
No.
No. You got to use it as a verb or.
Yeah.
I was thinking of like an adjective or something, or an adverb. My grammar's not great, but like I got Brented or something.
Brented.
Like, what does that mean? Does that mean I got deserted or?
That guy is Brenting.
Well, from my cycling days, there was stories. I used to ride a lot, and a friend of mine, tells a story. He went on a long bike ride with the guy whose last name was Epstein. And I think it was 100-mile ride, and they were riding out to the beach, but he ran short on time. So at a certain point, he just had to kind of go and leave whatever Epstein's, behind, because he just had I got to get there by 6 o'clock and my wife's there and she's waiting for me. So when someone drops you in a fight on the bike, it's been referred to being Epstein. So I was thinking using I got Brian or I got Brent or I got, what does that mean?
Yeah. That's fair. Answer it for that. That's fine. I don't. The person who asked this can't stick up for their question, so I think you can interpret it however you'd like.
Yeah. So I was thinking, the real question is, what I would like it to be versus what my family would tell me.
Right.
And I said, let's be just completely transparent. What my family would say, probably forgetful, just easily distracted, the cat story. And I hate to admit it, but it's probably all accurate, which is to be Brian would be very
forgotten.
Yeah, or, just just so focused on one thing that the house burned down around him.
So you go to the store and you have I gotta get milk and eggs and cheese, and you get home and your wife says, "Well, did you get it?" And I said, "I got the milk and the eggs." "Oh, but I Brianed the cheese." That would be.
Well, to be completely honest, I don't go to the store without a list, even if there's only one item.
Yeah.
And I show it to my wife and I say, "Is this what I'm getting?" Because I've made so many mistakes over the years. I write it down, I get it proofed, and then I at least have a shooting, chance of not blowing it.
Well, you come by it naturally. Your name is Brian.
That's right. Brian is a verb.
Scowling Divini. I was going with last name when I read this question. I just filled it in last name, which is funny because my last name is already a verb.
That is true.
Yeah. So
and a noun.
yeah, true, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a Renaissance name. It has all kinds of abilities.
That's not what I was thinking. I was just thinking it was a noun and a verb.
That's okay. I knew that's what you meant. Yeah.
And yeah, so
don't make me Brent. So I decided, because it's already a verb, I decided I wanted to make it describe something that people do that maybe doesn't have a name yet. Okay.
Like,
so
invent a word, basically.
Well, I'm using a word. It's my
Yeah.
but I was trying to describe an action that doesn't have like a specific name yet.
Yeah.
Right. Here's what I came up with, and there's probably is like a name for this, but I was thinking I'd like my name to describe when somebody publicly corrects somebody else's grammar on social media.
You got marked.
Yeah, exactly. You got marked.
Yeah.
Exactly. How perfect is that? Yeah.
That's got some traction. That's
right.
It does.
I really think that could work.
Yeah. I agree.
I think that's the winner of the three.
That's the one that actually could work and like
could work.
Last and could last. Yeah, it's true.
You know, like when I don't know if you've seen people like type the word your and will use the wrong verb, like the wrong your, and then somebody will correct it like, oh, I should have an apostrophe re or whatever. Yeah, that would be getting marked.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
But so you would be known as that kind of guy who marked people and that. So I don't know. I don't.
Yeah.
So it could be bad. I mean, like
yeah, it might be bad.
What church do you go to? Or that Pastor Mark thinks he's better than everybody else.
Yeah.
Any
news coverage is good news coverage, man. Any publicity is good publicity.
Yeah. And your kids at school, the kids in school would say like, hey, you think you have it tough. My dad's the guy that they call Mark. He corrects us all the time.
My kids already say that. Now they would have more reason. Well, that's pretty good for whoever sent in that question.
Good
I appreciate
question.
it.
Very good question.
That's fun. That's fun. So keep them rolling, because that kind of stuff is really fun to talk about. We're going to move now into oftentimes when we get together, Brent and I and Sean and kind of the way this podcast has been kind of oriented, we oftentimes get together and talk about various issues in theology or in church culture or in kind of spiritual life. We love talking about those things. That's kind of where our passions are anyway. And oftentimes when we get together, that's what we talk about. This week is a little bit of a change in course. We have an article this week that has a faith element to it, but it's actually more, I guess you would say maybe more in the, how would you describe this? The legal area?
Yeah, more in the legal
Public events. Public
events, maybe.
Yeah,
I mean,
nowadays for sure.
Yeah.
So what we have here, and I'll get into kind of at the end, I'll get into really the reason that I kind of was first attracted to this article in particular. But it's entitled, I don't know if you could say this is really a title, or I guess it is. It's entitled "The Court Delivers a Major Win for Religious Freedom." It's by somebody named Carrie Campbell Severino. Yeah. That's it. Severino. There's one more vowel in there than I expected. Thanks for marking me on that.
Yeah. You just marked. Yes, he marked. That was pretty much. I noticed that too. That was awesome.
Yeah, well done. Published in the National Review. It was actually back the beginning of the month, July 1st, directly after kind of a pretty big Supreme Court decision. And so we'll get kind of into that. Again, we won't read the text of this article in its entirety, just to kind of save some time and keep some focus. But we will post a link to this article and to another article in the description of the podcast. So if you want to read it, it's not very long. If you want to read it, you can click on the link and just kind of follow along there. I'll read some sections out of it and we'll discuss. But once again, this is out of the National Review, and the title is "The Court Delivers a Major Win for Religious Freedom." And so I'll start here with the very first paragraph. All right, guys?
Sounds good.
Sure.
Severino writes this. Yesterday, the Supreme Court handed down a major victory for religious liberty and for people of faith as it eviscerated the insidious Blaine Amendment for schools. So the first question that probably most of us, including myself, are asking is, what is the Blaine Amendment? And why does the court pushing it back mean a victory for people of faith? Now, they do explain it a little bit here in this article. I don't know, Brian, are you comfortable kind of talking a little bit about this?
I will give it my best shot.
Great, thank you.
You'll do better than either one of us, for
That's
sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
And I, candidly, like anything, I had to Google, look it up myself. I've heard about the Blaine Amendment, but what it actually means. So after the Civil War, and there'll be a theme that we'll talk about this one later as we talk more about this decision, to understand our constitutional history and a constitutional law, you really need to be a student of history. And, looking back, I realized every time you get into kind of these Supreme Court decisions, it's really wrapped in history, because the law just kind of marches along and builds, upon prior precedent.
Okay.
So I had to look up, and interesting, I think many of us today would be like, really? But after the Civil War, the Protestants were pretty prominent in public schools. The Bible was read in schools, and we didn't have a very, what you would think in public education today is very secular. But that wasn't the way it was after the Civil War. The Bible was, part of public life and part of the schools. And the Blaine Amendment was really, what the Blaine Amendment was it was an amendment to state constitutional law that said that states couldn't, if states were spending money on public education, it couldn't be schools that were religiously affiliated. Okay. And it was seen in history and in the decision about this is very anti-Catholic. There were parochial schools, and states didn't want to spend money on that. And the Protestants were behind it because the public schools was which was essentially Protestant was doing just fine. And you would think that if you didn't know the history, you'd say, what is this about? But it was really, he was a congressman. I don't think he was a senator. His name was Blaine, and he tried at the federal level to basically put in a prohibition that said, hey, if you're spending money on public education, it can't go to schools that are kind of religiously controlled or denominational. And it failed in Congress, but a bunch of states took it up and it got traction. And almost all states have some version of a Blaine Amendment in the years after that. Vermont is one of like 10 states that doesn't have a Blaine Amendment, but it's built into the state constitution that says, hey, if you're spending money on public schools, it can't be religiously affiliated. So that's the backstory of a Blaine Amendment. And it was just interesting to me as I looked at that, who would have thought that the Bible was part of a public education back after the Civil War, but that's the way it was.
That's amazing to think how ironic it is that it was Christians trying to limit other Christians, and now it's used to limit all Christians, or was used to limit.
Yeah,
all.
Sure.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Yeah.
I think that the historical perspective there. First of all, you said a mouthful saying like following the law through time is you have to follow history in order to keep up with the progression of law, which is fascinating. But then the notion of where this law comes from and what its motivations were, I love that. I mean, you would
never know that.
You would never know that. Yeah, I love that. So the next question, I would just say, and I think this is more of a philosophical and probably theological question, but I guess my other question, kind of based on this first sentence of this article, and I'll read it again because I want to keep that sentence here. It's a little bit of an assumed thing that they write, but I'm just interested in hearing your guys' thoughts here. I'll read this again. Quote, yesterday, the Supreme Court handed down a major victory for religious liberty and for people of faith as it eviscerated the insidious Blaine Amendment for schools. And my question right there is, genuinely for the three of us, do you think God sees this as a victory for people of faith? I'm just genuinely, honestly, I'm very curious about that.
I guess my initial thought is, I look at the New Testament and I think Roman Empire, was obviously in power and in control, and Israel was basically captive to that. Jesus was ministry was during that time, and obviously religious liberty was probably handled in a very different way. And so I don't think God's limited. I'm pro religious liberty, for the record, but I don't think God is limited by religious liberty in any way.
Yeah, my initial reaction, maybe kind of half answer, is, I'm sure he's not surprised by the decision.
Yeah.
And, candidly, there's not a lot of religious liberty around the world. And Christianity still spreads, and where maybe it spreads the fastest is where it's persecuted. So, we happen to live in a very pluralistic society with, USA being being very rooted in religious liberty of all types. Yeah, I don't think God's surprised.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree, not surprised, and kind of like, seeing things kind of from that broad historical perspective. Who knows what the ramifications of this could be in 15 years, in
Right.
20 years, whatever.
Yeah, that's a good point. That history does make you think, the irony of it all, kind of thing. So.
Yeah, and the court, without getting too far ahead of the discussion, I listened to oral argument. If you just go on to YouTube, right, and you type in any Supreme Court name, it'll have a podcast or a YouTube cast or whatever of that oral argument. You can listen to the people, and it's funny because I don't know why, but it's cartoon characters, mulching the words, but whatever. So it's a little bit weird. But I listened to the oral argument, and you listen to the questions from the justices, and what they seemed to be most focused on is, not maybe most, but a very big consideration. Well, where's this going? What's next? And there were a bunch of questions. So do we have to fund religious education? They were, probing at that, or if we provide public education, do we have to, essentially fund private education? And I think most of the answers were, no, this case doesn't really have anything to do with that. We can get to the case later, but this simply, the case was, if you're funding private education, there was this tax credit system in Montana, and you say, hey, here's essentially the equivalent of a voucher to go to a private school. What had happened, that's what the program got developed by the legislature, and then essentially the tax department said, well, you can use the tax credit anywhere as long as it's not a religious school. And the court was basically saying, if you make a program available to everyone for a private education, you can't discriminate against a person who makes use of that money for a private school. They weren't funding the private school. That was really a decision that the parent was making. So they were very prospective in their thinking, and wondering if this changed anything for public education. And I think all the answers were, no, this doesn't mean that the government needs to fund private education at all. It's just simply, if they go down that corridor and fund private education, they can't discriminate people that use it for a religious purpose. So I actually, despite the headline saying, major victory and all this, I could make a good argument that was a bit of a yawn, because there was a case a couple years earlier, and it was called Trinity Lutheran, but essentially it was a state had a program to basically help people improve their playgrounds by putting in like that rubberized stuff underneath the thing, so when the kid falls, he hurts.
Right.
And they made this program available to everyone. And one of the schools that applied was religiously affiliated, and they got turned down because it was religious. And the state, in that case, which is really what this current one's built on, said, hey, if you make a program available to all these schools, and you just can't discriminate against people that have a religious affiliation. So they didn't say you had to fund anything, but if you do make funding available, you can't engage in essentially what they call viewpoint discrimination. So despite the headlines, there was a case a couple of years ago that this was very similar to.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I would like to read a little bit, and you referenced the ability to hear some of this, which would be fascinating too. Further on down in the article, there's a quote of Justice Gorsuch's, I guess, elaboration on his own, I guess, his own take on the decision here. Forgive me.
And he was pro getting rid of it, basically.
I think Gorsuch was in the majority, wasn't he?
In the majority with.
Oh, he was in the majority. Okay.
So he was in the majority decision here, and in his concurrence in the majority decision, this is what he wrote. And so I'll just read his quote here, which I think is really interesting. He wrote this quote: "The Constitution forbids laws that prohibit the free exercise of religion. That guarantee protects not just the rights to be a religious person, holding beliefs inwardly and secretly, it also protects the right to act on those beliefs outwardly and publicly." And I think that's such a mouthful. I think there's a huge conclusion there that for me as I guess a theologian, that I see that is just so massive. I think this kind of describes, in many ways, the cultural divide that we see in the country. People on one hand think you should be free to believe what you want, so long as it doesn't impact anybody else, right?
Privatize it. Yeah.
Right. Where as long as it's private, it's fine, right? I think there's this acceptance of being religious, but as long as you don't act religious necessarily around other people. My question for you guys, and I think he suggests here, the Constitution protects the right to be privately, but also to act privately and publicly in a religious way. I'm curious, you guys as believers. Oh, sorry, there's a fly in my office here. As believers, as Christians, why do you see the idea of privatizing, or do you? I shouldn't assume something. Yeah. Do you see the idea of privatizing faith as a problem? And if so, why? A little bit of a tangent off of this, but I thought his point there was so huge. We really need to kind of define that and own that as believers. So I'm curious to hear what you guys think about that.
Say the question one more time. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm kind of dancing around the question. Yep. I should have worded it better. Is the idea of creating kind of just private faith a problem for Christians, where we're free to be religious but not to act religious?
Yeah, I would say, the Great Commission, go and make disciples. The implication in that is you share your faith. And so I think that there's a public aspect of that that's part of the Christian faith. So I would say to privatize it. Not every aspect of Christianity, but certain key aspects of Christianity wouldn't be able to be practiced, I would say. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, the First Amendment talks about the free exercise, which, at least when I think of exercise, is like jumping jacks and things you do, as opposed to thinking about jumping jacks. So I think the Constitution itself is in the direction of that being a religious person necessarily has, religious actions associated with that. Without opening a huge can of worms, there was a case, and I actually studied this in law school, so this is a long time ago. But it was a very interesting case because...
Go ahead, grandfather.
Grandfather Murphy.
Right, so we'll see how much I can remember now. But it's very interesting because, some of these questions, they're you got to chew on them a bit. But it was a case where these employees, I think it was in Colorado, who I'm not sure what their faith was, but smoking peyote was part of that. And essentially, they lost their job working for the state because I believe they both failed drug tests, two of the petitioners. And they basically defended on the grounds that you can't criminalize essentially what is religious behavior. We smoke peyote as part of my faith. And it was a 5-4 decision. It was actually held that the state could enforce that rule. And they basically said, and when you get into constitutional jurisprudence, it gets, they slice and dice the words, but they call strict scrutiny that, it was a neutral, essentially neutral statute that was, there were compelling state interests in kind of a drug-free workplace, and that essentially this wasn't really directed at that practice. So the intersection of some of our just general civil laws and the exercise of your faith is just going to collide at some point. I mean, because faith is, there are historical faiths like Christianity and others, but there's also, we're at the point now where people can have designer faiths.
Sure.
And if someone said, hey, you know what? My God doesn't believe in speed limits, right?
Yeah.
You'd be like, whoa, we're not allowing that free exercise. So they get at some tough questions, but I think in this case, they were basically saying free exercise. The people of faith were being discriminated because they couldn't participate in a program that was made available to everybody else. Imagine if you said, hey, we're giving out hamburgers downtown. Anybody who wants can get a hamburger. When you come up and they said, oh, what's your faith? And they said, oh, not for you. You'd say, wait a second.
Right.
I thought it was available for everyone. So they kind of came at it that way.
That's actually, we're in an interesting place. I actually just read an article about John MacArthur's church meeting and worshiping and singing, despite, the governor's kind of moratorium or instruction not to meet as a church.
Well, they stopped meeting. They asked them not to meet at all, but yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And, without really getting into, either side of that, I just see that as kind of what you're saying, Brian, where there's that is such a fundamental part of what it means to be a believer, to have the freedom to assemble together and to sing and worship together. For us, that's the, I don't believe in speeding, that's like a fundamental part of our faith. Right.
Yeah.
And what do you do as a Christian, if the laws of the land, and I'll pull away from the COVID example, but just if the laws of the land are diametrically opposed to the practice of your faith, I think that's a really fascinating question, and maybe outside the bounds of this article.
Yeah, sure.
Which is, like you said, kind of more about taxes and school funding,
Yeah.
But certainly you see where the rubber meets the road pretty quickly in this discussion, right?
Yeah. Well, to Grandpa Brian's comment, you definitely, you got the law, you got to draw, the law is, you got to draw the line somewhere, so it is what it is. I guess you got to do that. But to your question, Jesse, we must obey God rather than man. You judge is what Peter, was it Peter and John said that? I'm trying to remember. Peter and John, when they were asked not to preach Christ anymore, they said, no, we're going to do that. And, it's up to you to judge, what to do about that, but we must obey God rather than men. And, I think there's some gray areas about when that actually happens in a society, obviously, and different Christians can disagree. But some things are very black and white, and, it could come to the point where we have to say we must obey God rather than men, if that's what you're asking. So,
yeah.
I think there's obviously ways to kind of protest unjust rules or laws within the system.
Yeah,
certainly.
In the first instance. I mean, there was a case, I think last week, I'm going to sound like a legal beagle. I actually don't follow a lot of this stuff day to day, but
I'm loving this, Brian.
I know.
It's
I'm so glad we invited you.
Yeah.
yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
We'll see when it's all over.
Yeah.
But it was a case where I think a church in Nevada petitioned the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court doesn't have to take cases. There's certain cases that will be mandated, but very few. They get to decide. And they were basically protesting that it said, the casinos. Yeah, the casinos are essential, but our churches aren't essential. And essentially, the article was criticizing Chief Justice Roberts for declining to take the case because that certainly cries out for some judicial answer, which is who decides what's essential and non-essential.
Yeah,
right?
and they capped them like at 50 people, right? So they capped churches at 50 people, but casinos could be 50%. So even if a church could seat 1,500 with social distancing, they could only still have 50.
Yeah, I think casinos could have 500, which I guess it's Nevada, so go figure. But
yeah. Well, we know it's essential in Nevada, I guess.
Yeah, right, exactly.
My note here in this section of this article was, the comparison of God-given rights to law-given rights, to man-given rights. Mm-hmm. And I think, as citizens of a nation, we need to figure out how those intersect. Brent, to your point, where we need to take a stand on the rights that God has given us and enjoy those, whether or not there's repercussions. You know what I mean? And again, this might sound like I'm making a statement about the current situation, which I'm really not trying to. Yeah. But more just kind of in a general sense, that's kind of where we find ourselves as believers all the time, right?
Yep.
In the New Testament times as well as now, to think about the rights. And this is kind of why we've talked a little bit on the podcast before about does man or government even really grant freedom? and in the final sense, I would say no. God brings freedom.
Yeah.
So shall we move along? Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. I wanted to read another kind of a quote from another one of the justices, Justice Breyer. And so this isn't really so much a quote.
It's Breyer, but I didn't want to mark you. You
marked me twice now, but I've earned both of them. That's okay. The more we do it, the more maybe it'll catch on. It's actually
wait. You said, can I bring a mark up here? I noticed this because you're from New Mexico, quasi South, and you've said twice, your guys. It's you guys. So just another mark there.
This is really getting traction here.
So,
I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm going to continue. Now I forgot how to say Justice Breyer. Breyer, what did you say?
Close enough.
Okay, this Justice Breyer, who is known. This is a quote from the article, I should say. This is not my.
Yeah.
Now I can't even say Justice Breyer, who is known for taking muddled positions in this area, objected to the majority's rigorous standard, advocating instead for a, quote, flexible, context-specific approach in which judges would have free range. I read that again, Brian, I'm sorry to just keep on harping on your wisdom. Yeah. I'm not sorry, but I'm grateful. I don't really know what that means.
So is that like case by case?
Case by case?
Well, it makes two of us, because I read the thing like 3 times. I'm like, what? And he basically, it's kind of like, the judge will figure it out based on the facts and circumstances. And basically, he kind of got taken task by the majority, who said, that's like no standard at all. Like, it's like every judge decides whether they
what
like
they
it.
like, yeah.
And they basically, with incredible diplomacy, instead of kind of dumping on him saying that's a terrible rule, they just kind of like went past it. But it was like that's not a rule. It's so muddled. It's no standard at all. How could any judge be attempting to apply a uniform rule? It'd be just like, hey, do what's fair, you know? Okay, you know.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, do what's fair. Like, I think it's fair, you know? So it was really no rule at all. And when I saw Jesse, you know, you flagged that in the article before, I specifically went there and read kind of what he was saying multiple times. And I'm like, I literally don't know what he's saying other than the judge will come out with a good outcome, which is like, okay. So I think it was the majority did a good job of just saying, yeah, I know you'd like to navigate, you know, this meandering way to solve every problem, but it's really not a standard because just, you know, just to take a step back, not everything gets to the Supreme Court, right?
Right.
We have district courts, and so they got to kind of set the law of the land. If you have some standard that's no standard, you're really not helping the lower courts at all. And a lot of essentially infringement on free exercise would exist.
I want to get into what you just said, infringement on free exercise. This is kind of where I wanted to wrap up our discussion based on this article. I'll read one more quote. Brian, you did such a great job of kind of summarizing the Blaine Amendment. I won't go more into that, although I will say in this article, they do say a little bit more about where the Blaine, is it amendments, came from. Yeah. They go into a little bit of that history there, but Brian, you did such a great job. I'm not going to read that part again. It basically says, similar to what you were saying. I'll just read this last paragraph here, and I have a question based on that. The justices in the majority, I'm sorry, this is a quote. The justices in the majority have gone a long way toward blotting out the stain of religious bigotry that has permeated so much of the law in this area. They should be applauded for stating clearly that laws like Montana's that treat people of faith like second-class citizens have no place under the Constitution. Okay, great kind of summary. My question, kind of based on that and on this article, as believers, as Christians in America, is it our role to work to create a United States where Christianity is the official official religion? Is that our role, or is it not? As Christians, as citizens of the U.S., is it our role to try to create a country where Christianity is the official and endorsed religion, or is that not our role? And I'm interested to hear what your guys' thoughts are about that.
Sure. Yeah, I would say yes, it is, as long as it's my version of Christianity, because mine is right.
Is right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so.
What's to talk about, really, Brent? Right. That's next question.
Of course.
That's going back to the former question. That's my verb, a Brentocracy, where Brent just is in control, and so. But no, I don't know. That's a hard question. I mean, really, it is a hard question, because Christians have blind spots, and Christians still have a sinful nature, and so how about I dodge that question and let Brian answer first, since he's the lawyer.
I don't think this is a legal question, but I'll give you my best shot. What I think, for who knows where I got it, but I never read the New Testament as creating a thought. God's dictate in the New Commission to create a theocracy.
Yeah.
And I think what we have in the country is pluralism, where everyone gets to practice faith of their choice. And I just have never read the New Testament and the Great Commission to be an injunction for Christians to create a theocracy.
Well said.
Yeah. I mean, I would concur. I think maybe the way that a lot of religious political leaders kind of work into this, I think you could kind of get some of the Old Testament language and this idea of nation building out of the Old Testament, and I think you can kind of maneuver your way into that, into creating a nation that fears the Lord. But at the end of the day, Brian, I would agree with you that the pretty clear direction in the New Testament is not towards establishing a theocracy, but to establishing God's kingdom, right?
Right, which isn't a government.
Which is not a government,
right?
That's right. 100%. And I think, I mean, you could get into kind of the church history in the way that the church kind of moved from being kind of the scrappy kind of back alley faith to suddenly kind of coming into power in the Roman government and stuff. And suddenly you see this idea of theocracy becoming really attractive, where instead of ministering to the poorest and the weakest, suddenly we're in the halls of power, right? And you can see that transition in history, and makes it a little bit hard to look at the church today and see where our priorities are, which are very much in setting policy, which are very much in setting kind of natural tone. You can see where that is, and then you compare it to the way the church is kind of constructed in the New Testament, and you see, well, there's a little bit of a difference here, just in the people we're rubbing shoulders with, you know.
Sure.
And I think that's a really fascinating thing, and it's certainly not to throw stones and diminish work people have done, but I do think, you know, you can see the progression through history from the first church in the New Testament to where we are now. I would sum up just with your words, Brian, that we're not meant to establish a theocracy, but God's kingdom. I think that's really insightful. So Brent, now that you've heard other people talk, do you want to say something?
I have to say, and I'm being genuine, you guys did a good job answering that question.
All right.
And you know, but I do think it'd be an interesting study, and I've never done it. Does Christianity flourish better when they come out of a sense of weakness or a sense of strength? And I don't have any, I've never done it, but I do wonder if Christianity flourishes. When I mean that, I mean like people truly becoming Christians, being saved, born again, loving the Lord, living for the Lord, and seeing people come to Christ, and growing in their love for Him and love for others. Does that happen better when they're in a state of weakness, if you will, not being in power, or better in a state where they're sort of in control? And I don't know the answer to that. I just think of the verse that says, when I am weak, He is strong. Paul said that. And so I wonder if in general Christianity, when it's not like, you know, in power, it shines better because, and I think that's one of the reasons Christianity rose to power, is it Constantine and sort of recognized that. And so I don't know. It's just a really good question that I don't know the answer to, and I can't answer it better than you two did. You two did a good job. So, yeah.
But you bring up just a fascinating notion about where lives are genuinely being turned to follow Jesus. Yeah. And is that happening? You know, it's happening. God is God, right? It's happening everywhere, but where do you see that happening with kind of more fervor and more excitement?
Happening in China, communist China.
Exactly. Yeah. Great example. So I want to kind of thank you guys. I want to just kind of take a brief step back from this article. And I mentioned, and both you guys know this already, but the reason this article in particular really stood out to me when I first saw it, I was looking through my phone on like a little news app that I have that shows some headlines and stuff. And this article popped up, and the title of this article popped up, and right underneath it was the title of another article. I will read the title of the article we just discussed out of the National Review again, so it's just fresh in our minds. The court delivers a major win for religious freedom, National Review. Right underneath that was another article. And the title of this article was this: the Supreme Court bulldozed the First Amendment separation of church and state in this case, Espinoza versus Montana, which is the exact same case that we were just talking about. So on the National Review, you have this headline, huge win for religious freedom. And on Slate, you have the headline, the Supreme Court bulldozed the First Amendment separation of church and state. And I looked at both of those and I thought, these are both written about the same thing. And if I was reading one of these and not the other, I didn't know the other existed, right? Then I would think this one thing about this, I could be led to think this one thing about this case or what just happened, you know? The more I've looked into it, Brian, I love what you said. It's kind of maybe a little bit more of a yawn but both these titles are so kind of flamboyant and exciting. I brought this up because this is more of a philosophical question for you guys and for us to just kind of sit and think about. I'll read this. How do we as followers of the Lord, as Christians, people who honor truth, how do we sift through this tidal wave of headlines and opinions and form conclusions in this world today? How do we do this? I'm curious. I mean, I trust you guys are both wise. I'm interested in hearing your opinions. How do you navigate this world of kind of inflammatory news and stuff like that?
You want to go, Brent, or you want me to go?
Go ahead. I'll let you go first.
Well, it's not easy, right? When you read those two articles, just say, if I read one of them, I would have a very different position.
Right.
So it's clearly not easy. And, I think you have to have a healthy skepticism of the media in general, because they are all selling news. And depending on what your political persuasion, there's going to be some bias. What I have seen is what I think 10 years ago used to be spin. We've now just got to the point where there's just absolute falsehoods being told, and it's being sold as spin when it's just really not accurate. And there's no way other than to try to, and I have this discussion with my kids, is I try to read from different sources. And, it's something that happens over time. But if you read an article, I mean, let's say we've all watched like a news event or a news conference, and then we read an article. And I've watched Senate testimony, and then I've seen an article on it. And if I read an article that describes an event that I didn't witness, like that's not what I watched, then I just say, well, gee, I don't really, I'm losing confidence in that, that author or that publication. And I think you should just have a healthy skepticism. But I think there are folks that are posing as journalists that really are not, and they're not worthy of your attention any further. I can't tell you who those are. You get to read them yourself. But when you said that, like, how do I tell between these two articles? It would take a significant investment of time. That Supreme Court decision's over 100 pages. And so it's not easy. But I do think that, there's certain publications that are selling papers, and they're selling it to probably a particular demographic. I don't care what side you're on. And you should just be mindful of whether things being packaged to you, and try to engage people that think differently from you to have conversations and see if you're on the same planet. But it's not easy because the news isn't helpful. The other thing I would say is that I should have said earlier is, I think the statement, or you hear separation of church and state, should be like banned, because it's candidly meaningless. If you say separation of church and state, you can read into that phrase whatever you want, and people do all the time. And to understand what the phrase separation of church and state really means, you have to understand, what the Supreme Court has said over a period of time of the Establishment Clause. But, we live in a soundbite culture. And so it's hard to take on serious matters like the Supreme Court. I'll tell a quick story, and I'll let Brent go. But my son was in college, and he's a math major, and he said, I said, what are you taking this semester? And he said, I'm taking topology. And I said, what's topology about? It's a math course. And he said, well, do you understand group theory? And I said, no. He said, well, do you understand set theory? I said, no. He said, this is going to take a long time. Okay. And, when you live in a complicated world, just like engineering, it's built on, predicate principles to understand it. So some of the stuff isn't really all that easy to understand without devoting a good chunk of time. I would say probably it's healthy for all of us to try to read from both sides of the spectrum and just get as good a view as we can. I don't know, we can't quit our day jobs and research every thing, but we should try to read on different ends of the spectrums and get to the bottom. If you find someone just wrote you a ridiculous article, then I don't think they're really worthy of a lot more of your attention.
I really like the phrase you said there. I hate to reduce what you said to a soundbite, but the phrase you opened with, where they're trying to sell the news, right? Yeah. I think that is so important for us to just have that as a rule and understand that's what's happening. You know,
they sell subscriptions, right?
Right, yeah. Right, and fair enough. But both of these articles, I think, you know, the one we read, I think, delivers a more balanced and kind of more helpful perspective. Both of them had pretty inflammatory titles, though.
Yes, they did. They right? absolutely did.
They were both
inflammatory words. Yeah,
designed to be clicked on, right?
Yeah,
and
particularly the headlines. Yeah,
yeah, right. And that's what they're made to do. And so I think it's really, really wise to just understand, like it's not just necessarily just trying to present the facts. It's also trying to grab your attention. It's trying to be something that you want to read. And so I think that's a really good, just kind of rule of thumb to have as you're digesting whatever media you're digesting. So I really appreciate that. I think that was incredibly wise, Brian. Thank you. Brent, would you care to follow that?
No, Brian's hard to follow.
Yeah,
great answer. Great answer. I'll quote. Do either one of you know who Andrew Weil is?
No.
He is a sort of naturopathic physician, bald guy, beard, real kind of crunchy kind of guy. I'll quote him, who I strenuously disagree with from a medical perspective, as well as a faith perspective. I did read his book and would strenuously disagree. But his thought about the news is don't ever watch it or read it. That was his advice, and so I'll just quote him. Right.
Yeah, it can't trick you if you never read it. Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Well, okay. Thank you, guys. Man, I so appreciate both of you kind of navigating through that with me. I mean, just for me, just immediately into deep water, like stuff that I just barely can comprehend, words that I can't really pronounce. So, Brian, thank you in particular this week for your wisdom and kind of helping guide us through
Thanks.
that. I'm really grateful.
Anybody that's willing to listen to me is
well, we say that basically every week. So.
That's right. That's right.
I want to wrap up tonight with just a final question. Try to do this every week. Where the question is just kind of, where did you see God this week? I love this. I think it challenges us to be mindful of where God is working and active in our lives. And so sometimes these questions are designed, like I said at the beginning, to just make sure we're checking in on one another. Sometimes these questions are designed for me just to continually look in my life and try to be aware of how God is moving in my life. Because, we know he's there, but sometimes we can just kind of not be as aware of it or not be as intentionally acknowledging it. So I'm wondering, Brent, if you would be so kind as to answer, something you've seen God doing in your life in the last week or so.
Yeah. So this would be a compliment to you, actually.
Great.
So this past Sunday, we were getting ready for church, and we were talking about the stopped up toilet that I was supposed to take care of, and you took care of it because I forgot about it. And so
you pulled a Brian.
You Brianed it, man.
I Murphy'd Jesse, and so I was just like, it was just a natural, organic, it all worked out conversation. But we have a lot of those, and I'm like, I just love working with Jesse, and I've worked with lots of. I just think the Lord's been very kind to us in that, as a pastoral staff. Now and in the past, the Lord's been kind that we work well together. So I'm grateful for that. Yeah.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. Thanks for getting the toilet fixed, by the way.
You got it, man.
Yeah, there you
go. Brian, do you have something that comes to your mind?
Actually, two things come to mind. One that I had in mind when you first asked it, and then something Brent said must have triggered it. So Sunday I went golfing with my son, who's just picking up the game, and I hit this amazing 5-iron. I saw God, deliver my ball. No, it wasn't that. But we were at West Bolton Country Club, and I'd never been there before, and it is a spectacular thing of beauty just to see. Just God's creation is just amazing. But more recently, when I was getting ready for this, I was trying to print something out the printer, and I wasn't my calm self now. I was like, I can't get and my wife, I saw God. She was just so patient with me in my moment of stress. So I saw it, Jesus with skin on.
Oh man.
Amen to that.
Well said. Hey, shout out to Laura, man. That's great.
Laura. Yeah. When you didn't kill Brian when you let the cat out, you really were.
That too.
Yeah.
This is after the cat. This is after.
I know. You got a good wife.
No kidding. Yeah.
Well, hopefully
that's
I won't
great.
do that either of those things in the next 24 hours. But you never know.
The well might be running dry.
Yeah. All right.
I'll round it out then. This is going to sound church related, but really, honestly, it's actually kind of personal. We have, as a church at Daybreak, been going through a sermon series studying a particular book in the Bible. We've been studying the book of Malachi, which is the last book in the Old Testament. It's a minor prophet, which really just means it's a short prophetic book. In common terms, it means it's a book that nobody reads in the Bible. Not nobody, I shouldn't say that, but not often read or preached about, honestly, minor prophets. And we've been going through this book of Malachi, and just from a personal, just between the three of us, it's been such a gift, like an unexpected, I don't know if a pastor should say this, but an unexpected gift for me. I've gotten more out of that book than I ever dreamed that I would personally. I really enjoyed preaching about it. I really enjoyed sharing that with everybody, as I always do from God's word. But just personally, this study has just been really just so exciting to get into every week. And I've really just been enjoying that. I feel like it's just been this, like every week, just this little gift from God in that book. And I don't know if I could, is it fair to say I didn't really expect that? I expected the study of Malachi to be more of a slog, to be more like, just I gotta try to dig through this and figure it out. And it was going to be really like academic and stuff. And it was a lot of study, but it was just such a joy. And I really, honestly, I believe that was a gift from the Lord, that he just kind of was like, I'm going to give you some grace as you study this book and give you some joy there. So I'm just so grateful for that. I'm really happy.
I think the book punches above its weight.
Yeah. Well said.
It's just a little bit like I had, maybe to echo what you said, my expectations were maybe where your expectations were, which is, like that. And it's been some really good stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Well, Brian, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thanks for having me.
A pure joy to have you on here. I will say, you've rounded out our last. We have guests next week as well. Looking forward to that. But you have continued in this long string of very strong guest hosts for Podification, and I'm reasonably sure that most of our listeners would probably rather have our guests host this podcast than us in the future. But be that as it may, really grateful, Brian, to have you. So thank you for spending the evening with us.
You're very generous. Thanks.
And Brent, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was just going to say thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to echo. Yeah, it's been great having you, Brian. We'll have to bring you back for sure. So.
Yeah.
Hey.
All right.
It'll be fun. Well, you guys, it's been great. It's been great.
Right.
Thank you all for listening. Appreciate you. Again, if you do have like articles you'd like us to discuss, we'd love that. If you have questions, deep theological questions, silly questions, which are fun as well. We all learned new words today, which is exciting.
And if you have legal questions, email Brian. He will charge you.
He'll charge you.
You can email Brian.
Just info@daybreakvermont.org. Look forward to your comments and stuff. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Be good.
Bye, guys.
Take care.
All right. let's see.
Still recording.
Yeah, stop.
Still recording.